Hi, I'm Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 21 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, I'm here to tell you, those of you who've been waiting my return from a photographic trip to Italy, the road to Rome is paved with all kinds of good intentions. If you last listened to episode number 20, 1 month ago, you discovered that I had said that I would try to do some podcasting from the road, and by golly, you know what I did? I didn't open my laptop once. I instead made photographs and experienced the Italian culture and drank wine and ate great food and made a lot of photographs. And the film is now drying, hanging up in the darkroom. I've got all of the sheet film processed, and all of the 120 film has been processed and proofed, and still have to proof all of the sheet film, but uh, a week after my return, I'm finally sleeping at the regular times for the Midwest here where I live, and am sort of back on schedule. So I apologize for my marked absence, and I hope it won't hasn't put too many of you off the idea of listening to Camera Position, and I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad to be back. I had a great trip, made a lot of new photographs that I'll be sharing with you over the next number of weeks, as well as we have been doing, sharing with you photographs of other photographers, some of my favorite image makers. And in sort of in the spirit of the idea of an Italian vacation, and in the spirit of certainly one of my very favorite image makers, I'm going to take a little departure today and talk, instead of talking about photography, talk about a painting by a painter named Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, more commonly known as Caravaggio, his last name. And of course, just like many Italian artists from the grand days of Italian painting and sculpture, he takes his name from the town of his birth, the Italian town of Caravaggio. So Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, commonly known as Caravaggio. And whenever I am in Rome, I make it a point to try to visit as many Caravaggio paintings as I can fit into a day, or two or three, however many days I have. And I never fail to make it to the French church in Rome, which is San Luigi dei Francesi, and that's the French Catholic Church's home in Roma. And take a look at the Calling of Saint Matthew, Caravaggio's masterpiece canvas from 1599. He started it in 1599, finished it in 1600. It's a fairly large canvas. It's in the Cantarelli Chapel in the church that I mentioned earlier, the French church, the San Luigi dei Francesi church. Not very far from my favorite parts of Rome, which are the Centro Storico, the historical center, where the Piazza Navona and the Rotonda, Piazza della Rotonda, where the Pantheon is. So this church is not very far from there. And hopefully you've got your eyeballs on it here. If you're listening through your computer, it should be and you're listening through iTunes, you should be able to see it there in the lower left corner of iTunes. And then, of course, I've got the pictures up on the cameraposition.com website so that you can take a look. And really, the reason I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about this painting today is the idea that Caravaggio, I think, would have made a darn good photographer. Kind of maybe a blasphemous thing to say, I guess, about one of the great Baroque artists of all time, and certainly one of my favorite artists of all time. But the idea that Caravaggio had two things going for him as an artist. Obviously, he had a lot more than just two things, but two things that I really find intriguing. And one of them is a tremendous sense of light. here in this painting. And let me describe a little bit about what's going on in the picture. So that you sort of get at the idea. It's illustrating a biblical passage where Christ has come to call Saint Matthew to his profession as an evangelist, and so we see Christ at the extreme right side of the canvas, and it's interesting. Christ is dressed along with Saint Peter in the garb of their time, of the time of Christ. And the rest of the crowd is dressed in the garb that Caravaggio's era would have used, the kind of clothing that they would have been wearing in 1599. But we see Christ over at the right side of the canvas, and he is calling to St. Matthew, and St. Matthew is the bearded guy just a little bit left of center, and he's sort of pointing to himself saying, really, me? You want me? And at the same time, he's in a sort of a customs house, and he's dealing with some money, and at the same time that he's pointing to himself, he's also kind of protecting his stack of cash on the table in front of him. And there are some other characters arrayed around the scene, including this incredibly angelic-faced boy, just a beautiful thing. But the idea of this light, this beam of light that comes in through that window and reaches so far into the room and illuminates the faces of all of these people, but in a way that really doesn't fit exactly the idea of the light. So the idea of where the light's coming from, or the intensity or direction of the light, certainly the direction is correct, but it seems to illuminate the room a great deal more than we would really think that it would. And that part, I think, is really interesting because photographically, one of the things that we do, I think, as photographers, is often exaggerate the idea of what light is, what light and shadow might be. And here Caravaggio is doing that very thing. But the other thing that I think Caravaggio did in many of his paintings, and some of you may not have ever seen any of Caravaggio's work before, and some of you may be old friends with this great painter, but one of the things that he does in almost all, or did in almost all of his canvases, is exaggerate a moment. And it's that part that just really kind of amazes me, because here's a painter working several hundred years before photography's invention has burbled to the surface, and yet he is looking at this moment, a moment of high tension, a moment of exaggerated tension, and a moment where everything in the picture really works because of the time that he's chosen to freeze in this particular image. So it's this method of using that sort of dramatic moment that I think is really pretty extraordinary. And there's an awful lot of stuff going on in this painting. One of the things you may note, those of you who kind of looked at this a little more carefully, is that the gesture that Christ uses as he points is a very relaxed gesture, and then you look at it again and you realize that it's the gesture that Michelangelo Buonarroti used in his Sistine Chapel ceiling. And so there's this idea, too, that I think we've talked about in previous camera positions, of using ideas from previous artists. So here's Caravaggio really kind of lifting this sort of gesture from a master who had come before him. And I think that that part is also pretty interesting. So the idea here of Caravaggio's The Calling of St. Matthew is really to illustrate that great pictures really use some of the same kinds of devices, regardless of where they come from. So here's a great picture, a tremendously beautiful moment, incredibly beautifully captured in terms of light. And I'll let you spend some time reading up on Caravaggio on your own in terms of what he represented in the world of fine art in his era. But he was absolutely a revolutionary artist, painting things with an extraordinary realism that that nobody had really ever seen before, and really was often very controversial. Very interesting as well that he painted this particular canvas at the age of 24. So the idea of being able to make something that extraordinary at that early age is pretty tremendous. So hopefully you've gotten something out of the idea of looking at other forms of art. And in the next episode of Camera Position, I'll be posting a lecture or presentation, I guess. I think it's sort of a lecture that I gave recently at a Macintosh reseller in my area here who had asked me to come and talk about creative process. It'll be substantially longer. It's about an hour long. So longer than your standard issue Camera Position, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. But the idea behind this particular episode that I wanted to post spends a lot of time talking about how other forms of creative endeavor are certainly very important for us as creative people. So if you ask yourself, when's the last time you went to the theater? When's the last time you sat down and read some great literature, something that really moved you in some particular way? I think looking at great art really can help us as creative people not just see remarkable things about the way in which an artist like Caravaggio put together a canvas, but also can help us to see a whole lot of other things about the way in which art functions in the world. So thanks for joining me. Again, thank you for those of you who have stuck around during my month-long hiatus here. I promise I won't let it happen again. I appreciate those of you who wrote to me over the time I was away. And feel free to drop me a note at jeff@jeffcurto.com or stop by cameraposition.com and leave a comment on the blog there. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to say, always interested in hearing your opinions about what's going on in the Camera Position podcasts, and I'm enjoying doing this for a number of reasons, but certainly hoping to get some ideas out there and help you become better photographers and more interesting image makers and better consumers of imagery as well, I think. So thanks again for listening, and hope you join us again on the next episode of Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.